welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I will be telling some true scary stories. I hope you enjoy your stay with us on this rainy night. Without further ado, let's begin. I was upstairs in my room one night, playing video games with the volume turned up really loud, when I thought I heard noises coming from downstairs. I muted the TV and listened closely, but I didn't hear anything. I resumed playing the game for another hour when I heard it again. Only this time it was louder. I was sure I heard it this time and was a little freaked out. To assure myself, I went downstairs to the basement where I thought I heard the noise coming from. As soon as I opened the basement door, I was hit with a cold breeze. I went downstairs and saw the window wide open. I was sure I had closed and locked all the windows in the house. I was ready to make a run for it when something stopped me. I turned around, and for the first time, I noticed the closet door was slightly cracked open. I stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes in front of that door, debating whether I should open it. I moved closer and put my hand on the doorknob. All of a sudden, I heard a creepy crackle coming from inside the closet. I have never run faster up a flight of stairs before. I locked the door and called the cops, who had an unusually fast response time. They came in and searched the house, and not even 5 minutes into their search, I heard a gunshot from downstairs. A few minutes later, they came out with a deranged-looking man, probably homeless. They put him in the back of the car and told me that they had opened the door and the man was holding a gun. He had shot at them and missed. Luckily, the cops disarmed him and arrested him. The scariest part was how close I was to opening that door and likely being murdered. I'm a graffiti artist. Before you judge me and say I'm a bad person or whatever, hear me out. I work on pieces in my city, Birmingham in the United Kingdom. This happened a few weeks back. In the east side of the city, there is a canal that runs through the city, which is naturally full of tags and graffiti pieces, as it's a pretty quiet spot, but certain parts of it are visible to the public. It isn't easy to get down into the canal, but me and my friend, who's also into graffiti art, stumbled across a hidden ladder in a rundown car park on the back streets of the east side. We climbed down and realized we could walk the whole length of the canals. The water was pretty high up on this day, so we had to be careful. After about 30 minutes, we had painted over old, ruined pieces of graffiti, created new tags, and just generally had a good time. That's when we noticed the man standing on the other side of the water. At first, we were startled, throwing our cans back into my backpack and getting ready to run, as we thought we were about to get caught. However, the man just stood there. For a long while, I stood watching him as he stared lifelessly at us. It was pretty unnerving. The guy had to be about 40 years old with gray hair, but he was standing so abnormally. His legs parted evenly and his arms parted from his body, at his sides. He didn't move, he just stared. I looked at my friend, who I'll call Josh for this story, and he looked back at me, by the looks, unnerved. He decided to shout, "Hey," at the man, and then, "You all right, buddy?" At first, I thought this was a bad idea, but I just let it happen to see the man's reaction. Nothing. He just stood there like a mannequin. We were pretty shaken up, but we just said to walk further along the canal and continue painting. About an hour later, we'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. We was now down to our last 2 cans of paint, so we was about to call it a day when I stepped back to see what we'd created. Just then, I noticed the same man from before, standing in the middle of the dirty canal, just staring lifelessly at us. I was so surprised to see him that I dropped my can into the canal and turned to face Josh. He noticed the man too. The man took the first step we'd seen him take all day, towards us. We dropped the cans and sprinted across the path back to the ladder. We pretty much ran all the way back to the city center, where we caught our breath and tried to figure out what the hell we just experienced. It was a beautiful Friday afternoon, and I had some free time before picking up my kids from school. I decided to take a drive along some back roads in my hometown. As I was driving, I saw a man with his thumb out trying to catch a ride. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and he was carrying a fishing pole in a backpack. He seemed pretty innocent, but as a lone female, I had been taught with hundreds of hitchhiker gone wrong stories to keep driving, so I drove past him and continued on my way. As I was driving, I couldn't help but feel guilty about my decision not to pick him up. I thought to myself, if I was hitchhiking, I'd hope someone would pick me up. I also had a new self-improvement goal of doing the things that scare me as often as possible. So I made the decision that if I looped back around and he was still walking, I would pick him up. About 10 minutes later, I looped back around, and he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous about picking him up, but I knew I had to follow through with my decision. As soon as he got in the car, I realized I may have made a terrible mistake. Firstly, he seemed like he was high on something and smelled terrible. Secondly, he was looking at me like I was a feast, and he was starved. I was internally freaking out and trying to decide how I would defend myself if he tried anything. He told me his name was Wayne and that he lived about 5 minutes from where I picked him up. He also told me that he was living in a house with an old man who didn't want to come with him. He tried to convince me to come to his house and hang out with him and drink the next day. I was feeling relieved when I finally dropped him off at a little shack surrounded by junk cars and other debris. He continued to try to persuade me to come inside with him, but I declined and left. On Monday, my instructor asked me if I knew anyone down a certain road. He told me that someone had been murdered there. I was shocked and told him about picking up Wayne on Friday. Just a little while later, I saw Wayne's picture on Facebook. The TBI had picked him up for stabbing someone to death in the very house where I had dropped him off on Friday. It turned out that the old man he was living with didn't even exist. I was relieved that I had made it out safely, but the experience left me shaken. I knew that I would never pick up another hitchhiker again. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city, in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. Play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout, dinner, pizza, or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2, fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it, but Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never saw him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open, even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then I head down to my basement. While I'm heading down the stairs, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "Oh, fucking the banging stopped." I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting in my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was gonna give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he just had no will to live anymore. Before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship, and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss ya. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched, but I seemed to be the only one who heard these things. So I shrugged it off as my imagination, and in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well. Manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large, we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it. And sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch, covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone, because there was no way in. And because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around it and then doing the same to another tree, swinging around it and then doing the same to another tree. Basically, a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm and whispered, "What the fuck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit." I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of "the woods." That really happened, right? It most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 a.m, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of.